My name is Dr. Rory Devine. I'm an associate professor at the University of Birmingham, and I'm based in the Centre for Developmental Science, which is part of the School of Psychology in Birmingham. So I'm a developmental psychologist, and I specialise in children's social and cognitive development. One of the things I'm very interested in as a researcher is this idea of developmental diversity and developmental change. And a central kind of strand of that work that I've been doing over time is thinking about children's social and cognitive development. So in particular, how well children think about other people's thoughts and feelings, how good they are at tuning into other people's minds, but also things like how good young people and children are at controlling their own actions and their own behaviors, or what we call self-regulation. Some of our research using longitudinal methods has shown that children who perform very well on these very basic cognitive skills at the start of primary school, for example, seem to outperform their peers near the end of primary school on kind of indicators like how well they kind of build and maintain relationships with other people, so how well they are socially adjusted in the classroom. And then on the other side of that, we've been thinking about how the experiences that children have actually shape these emerging cognitive skills. So can we actually do anything to change these skills? And one of the interesting findings that I think is really relevant for education is this idea that the kinds of interactions that you have with children and young people actually can help shape these basic cognitive skills. So we have found that when children are exposed to kind of rich conversation, involving kind of references to other people's thoughts and feelings, this can actually kind of benefit young children's mind reading skills. For things like executive function or self-regulation, we might look at how good a young person is at waiting, how good they are at holding back a response, how good they are at maybe moving between different activities. We've been thinking about how these kinds of skills might underpin social behaviors, social interaction skills. So how well children integrate other people into their play, how well they get along with others in group settings, how good they are at building and maintaining friendships, those kinds of things. What we found in our studies using these kind of longitudinal designs is that often the young people who maybe perform really well early in childhood, if you follow them up over time, they perform really well later in childhood. And there are these kind of stable differences between young people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a fixed thing, right? So what we find is that there's room for change. In particular, we've looked at things like how often you refer to other people's thoughts and feelings in conversations, in reading books, in playing together. So based on this work, we've begun thinking about what about the conversations that teachers might have with young people in the classroom? Are there opportunities where we can draw in conversations around different people's points of view, comparing different characters' points of view? Children are much more likely to be in classrooms with people who aren't from the same community or background as they are. And so an important social skill in the modern world, I guess, is this idea that we have to be able to think about and work with people who might have different points of view than we do. And so what our work has shown recently is that children who have these friendships with people from different ethnicities, different racial backgrounds, they actually outperform their peers who don't have those friendships on some of our tests of perspective taking, mind reading, things like that. We're lucky here in Birmingham to be based in one of the most diverse cities in Europe. So it's what we call a super diverse city. And so we compared classrooms and schools where people were in very diverse classrooms, so where there might be multiple ethnic groups all together in one classroom, versus very homogenous classrooms. And it was really interesting because we found that despite all of this kind of media concern about, diversity, young people are not learning about their own culture and all this sort of stuff. What we actually found was that the children in the diverse classrooms were outperforming those in the kind of more homogenous classrooms in terms of their mind reading skills. I guess it challenges some of the concerns that people might have around greater integration, enhancing classroom inclusion, things like that. So I guess diversity seems to be enough to maybe have some benefit. But what we found in particular was that friendships really mattered. So it's not simply about being in a classroom where there are people who are different from you, but actually having close relationships with those children. I think it's just at the moment, it's really thinking about how we can foster those relationships between children, and not and trying not to see difference and diversity as a concern. I think trying to see it as something that is potentially a really positive asset in the classroom in terms of helping children develop their social cognitive skills. Cognitive skills might be a kind of central organizing mechanism that could explain this, right? So the way we've been looking at this lately is to large-scale studies where we capture the range of different symptoms and difficulties that children experience, using kind of psychological questionnaires which look at traits and symptoms associated with things like depression, anxiety, conduct problems, but then on the other end, neurodiversity traits, so things like autism and ADHD. And what we've found is that regardless of which one of these kind of traditional categories of problems that you might have, it seems that all kids who experience distress or difficulty are having the difficulty with social cognition. And so we're beginning to think that perhaps social cognition then could be a target, regardless of your diagnosis, if you want to help children improve their kind of social lives in some way. There's a couple of things that I think teachers are doing already every day that we could kind of emphasize a little bit more. So for example, some of our research suggests that when teachers promote conversations between people in the classroom, when they promote discussions and highlight different people's points of view, this can be beneficial. Another thing that could be beneficial is thinking explicitly about thoughts and feelings and labeling those words and saying those words when we think about stories that we might be reading in class, or even in kind of disciplinary situations, not just saying that's wrong, don't do that, but explaining, for example, why what the child has done might be upsetting to the other person or what they might be feeling. So everyday things like that we've shown in some of our work can actually be quite beneficial for children's social cognitive skills. Yeah, so the university has a large campus located just outside the city centre. So we're very, very close to the city. It's one train stop from the city centre. The university is a great place to work as a psychologist and a great place to study psychology. We've got one of the largest schools of psychology in the UK, and our school covers the full range of psychological research. We've students in our psychology program from across the globe. I mean, one year I was teaching our first year program and we had students represented from 70 different countries in the classroom. So it's really great place to kind of meet people from everywhere.